Yeah. Hello there. This is our second lecture, right? Believe it or not, we're already jumping onto the most important things here, right? The actual topics. The first topic we're going to pick today is the Americas, Latin America, right? And we are taking perhaps the furthest historic period out of all of them. It is the pre-Columbian, partially pre-Columbian civilizations are going to be explained, but mostly we're going to talk about how the Europeans have encountered the pre-Columbian civilizations, right? These ancient Latin American civilizations that have existed for hundreds, some of them for thousands of years, and what has come out of that. We're going to talk about the Conquista or the conquest of the Americas, which happened in the late 1400s, early 1500s, right? So let's move forward. Uh, this is something that doesn't apply to us, right? The simulation is not what we're going to do in this class. It is only applicable to the offline class. Instead, you're going to have clearly the research paper as stated in your syllabus and assignment section and the assignment section in the Canvas. So we're going to talk about pre-Columbian America. The Old World, right, is the name that stands for Asia plus Europe, right, mostly, because that was the kind of world that people knew existed. And since antiquity, the image of the world didn't really change much. That medieval times, although people knew that there is a whole large um, entity lying on the east, right? That's called Asia. But it's not just Asia; it's a bunch of different territories and countries, kingdoms, that have existed, and to some extent, Europeans have always been involved, right? It goes all the way back from ancient Greece, ancient Rome, and it kept going on. Then what happened was a new empire rose in power, right? It was the Ottoman Empire that disrupted the easy route to Asia, meaning that most of the European countries, the Christian European countries of the medieval times, weren't able to get access to the very, very valuable goods that Asian empires of the old have possessed. And that created the need, right? So you could either trade with the sanction of the Ottomans, but the problem was Ottomans were Muslim, Christians were, Europeans were Christians. They didn't really get along all that well. So what do you do, right? Either you find a long route, which the Portuguese did. They went around Africa, all the way around the continent, in a very complex and dangerous voyage with a with several naval bases to support the travel, and that was their take, right? That is why they have jumped onto the Asian trade. They were the first ones to jump into that later, it was Renaissance already, right? 1500. So um, they were the first ones to start the Asian trade out of the old European countries to do the, on their own, and then followed by the Dutch and British. But that's another topic, right? The Spanish did the opposite, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit. So, all right, so while the old world was developing in its own pace, and we all know it because most of the history that we are doing and you've done in school and here maybe to some extent would mostly focus on Europe, to a lesser extent on Asia, but very little of that would be focused on the Western Hemisphere. While at the same time, again, you all know what that is, but Western Hemisphere was also developing, even though it was unknown, largely unknown to the Old World. Yes, there've been some contact. There've been Vikings traveling to Greenland, right? There've been reports and assumptions that some of the African people have occasionally traveled across the Atlantic and were able to get to South America, at least parts of South America. But none of that was systematic, right? Because again, the technology or the lack of such precluded people from systematically traveling such long distances. That was almost impossible. And the ships weren't that great also. So it's not just about not having enough food and food going, spoiling all the time, and then not having enough nutrients. and having horrible sicknesses as a consequence of that. There's also the question of where do you get drinkable water, etc., etc. Many questions, many issues that were very hard to surpass. So, um, religious, geographical, and cultural differences have caused a serious inequality and technological advancement between native civilizations of America and the Europeans. Weapons, strategy, and tactics, agriculture, and sciences, by the moment of their collision with one another, were completely different. America was a unique, both North and South, was a unique environment. First things first, and Central and South America, they never had good iron, right? So that means no steel. So no steel tools, no steel weapons. They're the substitute, right? Because of that, they had to develop their armaments in a completely different way, because what they were using wasn't steel weapons, it was obsidian, which is a sharp stone. If anybody ever had those fancy IKEA knives, they're very sharp. That's exactly what kind of weapons they used. It's a very sharp stone. It's a lot sharper than any steel knife you would ever have, but it's also easy to break. So, and there's no metal armor. So, what do you do? What do you do if you don't have any metal armor? You have leather armor, right? Or any other alternative. It doesn't mean it's bad, right? It just means it's a little different. So, but also agriculture, sciences, all of that has been developing in its own pace, in its own way in Latin America. What I want to say is that the ancient pre-Columbian civilizations weren't undeveloped, right, or underdeveloped. They were just developing differently. They were focusing on different stuff. In some of the aspects, they were a lot more developed than the Europeans. Cities, for instance, with Aztecs and Mayas, were incredible compared to what the Europeans have been doing, right? So the Europeans who came there and looked at those cities, those marvelous cities, really were stunned because they've never seen anything like that. The technology of building those cities was surpassing what the Europeans ever knew about this, right? So they've been making a lot of a better job than the Europeans did. Mathematics, for instance, right? The Europeans back then didn't really know zero, and in Latin America, these pre-Columbian civilizations have had the knowledge of zero since very early, back in the day, without having to recur to the Persian or Arabic or Indian knowledge. None of that really mattered. They have already created that for themselves. Also, astronomy and everything connected to that, including calendars. They had very complicated calendars, which the Europeans didn't really have, right? They had that old Gregorian calendar, which was, very much imperfect and very unspecific, very inaccurate. But Mayans have developed such a calendar that it went hundreds and hundreds, even like 1,000 year forward, right? They could calculate each day and where all the planets and stars will be at this time, right? They had very complex knowledge of that, something that was inaccessible to Europeans. But Europeans had an upper hand when it comes to industry production, when it comes to armament, warfare, right? So everything that matters when you are fighting someone. So anyway, just different, not worse, not better, different, right? That's the key point, key takeaway from this. Religious factor has also been particularly important in this clash of European and Native American civilizations. While American civilizations often saw white conquistadors as gods, that happened exactly with Aztecs. We're going to talk about this a little later. For instance, Quetzalcoatl is literally a white feathered serpent who looks like a white male with a white beard. Again, there have been speculations where that came from. Some say, well, this is literally them having seen, Vikings or something, and they've seen this white people with white beards, and they're like, oh, that's gods, right? And the legend has it that Quetzalcoatl is a Prometheus figure for the Native American people, right? For the pre-Columbian civilizations. It is the kind of god that goes and gives secrets and technology to people, right? So, a very good guy apparently. So anyway, with that said, they've looked at them and like, oh my God, these are gods, right? This is awesome. Let's welcome them. And that's they've met them with interest, they met them with respect, and that certainly gave Europeans an upper hand, right? Because the Spaniards, they have had a different vision of what the Native Americans were like, because Christian conquistadors saw the local cults as diabolical, right? And you're going to see the images, and imagine you are a person from, 13, 1400s, 1500s even, and you're a Christian, you're a pious Christian, and you're not exactly the smartest person there is, right? Because you're a soldier, a conquistador, you're not very smart, you haven't been receiving education. The best thing, the closest thing to education that you have received is how to ride a horse and hold a sword or rapier, right? So that's not very scientific, really, and doesn't exactly allow, flexibility into your worldview. So again, they've looked at those gods, they see how they're depicted, and they typically are depicted as horrible creatures, and they're like, oh my God, they're worshiping devils. Really, they're just worshiping devils, right? They're devil worshippers. We have to save them, right? We have to, and they've dedicated themselves to helping these people realize their ways are wrong, and let's teach them how to be, how to properly worship God. And that's additional dedication to push further with conquest, because again, these people are literally condemning themselves to the eternity in hell. So again, this is something that we would watch. Normally, we would watch this when we would be doing this lecture offline. We'll be watching it right now. But you should watch it at home, right? Right after you're done with this video. I hope by this moment in time you already understood how your out-of-class activities are going to look like. So yeah, you watch my video, then at the end of the video you open the PDF and you watch these 3 videos because they're very nice. They give you a lot of information on all 3 most important, those are not the only ones, but those are the biggest and most significant pre-Columbian civilizations, right? Not just some, because again, some of you might think that we're talking about some tribes or underdeveloped people. No, all 3 of these are legit civilizations, right? And that's important to watch all these. They're not very long, about 20 to 30 minutes each, very educational. So, we're going to jump, however, in this lecture. We're going to focus more. We're not going to talk about these civilizations on their own. We're going to talk about specifically, we're going to focus specifically with their clashes with Europeans and their encounter with Europeans, right? So this is, we're gonna focus on, I'm sorry, I keep moving my camera, Mayan civilization, right? So the Mayan civilization is one of the first ones that that the Spaniards have encountered with. Of course, at first, they've met Taino people at the island of Santa Elena that when Columbus arrived, and all of them were killed. So yeah, not a civilization, and on the islands you don't have civilizations as much because there's not that much development happening, not enough resources for that, etc., etc. So the Mayans are perhaps the oldest, well-studied pre-Columbian culture out there. They can be traced up to 2,000 years BC. That's ancient Egypt level time, right, for you guys. This is the alternative of ancient Egypt in the Western Hemisphere, really, or ancient Greece. So yeah, it corresponds with Babylon, ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, and it reached its peak around the period between 600 AD and 900 AD, right? So the Middle Ages, really, literally Middle Ages, early Middle Ages to the beginning of the, legit Middle Ages. And then they still continue to exist, but already at a much less developed and less influential degree. So known for their sophisticated art, architecture, mathematical and astronomical systems, Mayans helped build themselves awesome, iconic pyramids, temples, palaces. They're responsible for, thanks to their science, they've been responsible for those calendars and a lot of innovations that look, very amazing considering how old that civilization is. They developed a complex writing system that's called Mayan glyphs, and one of the few developed written languages in the pre-Columbian Americas, right? And that language was only deciphered in the 20th century by Soviet linguist Knorozov, because originally it was Diego de Landa, which was a priest, right, cardinal of Catholic Church, who has claimed that he has deciphered the language, but he has made horrible mistakes in deciphering it, and basically we only started realizing what those glyphs really mean thanks to a Soviet linguist. The Mayans were, again, very skilled in agriculture, cultivating crops like maize, beans, squash, and cocoa. They practiced a polytheistic religion, as all of these people in the Western Hemisphere, means that they believed in a multitude of gods, involving ritual ceremonies. Some of them even included human sacrifices, where souls of the sacrificed were messengers between the people and the gods. So being sacrificed for Mayans, it wasn't happening often. It was only happening during the most drastic times. So let's say drought, people are dying from famine, or sicknesses or something like that, right? Epidemics. When something like that happens, they send an envoy, they kill him, they send an envoy. He goes straight to the gods because of how they believe that people sacrifice, go straight to the gods, straight to heaven. And a person can ask, hey guys, my people downstairs are suffering. Could you help them somehow, right? So that was considered to be very important. Most of the time, the human sacrifices would not involve death, but some blood, right? They would typically just do some bloodletting from arms, legs, sometimes their genitals. I know that sounds horrible, but apparently a very precious piece of their body and blood there was, probably also very precious, right? So they believe, okay, we're gonna cut ourselves in the place where it hurts most. Maybe that brings gods, some more additional value. So yes, some blood, and the person doesn't die. Typically, that doesn't include people dying. And other times there would be, gold, fruit, whatever else of value would also be sacrificed. Again, human sacrifices were real, but very, very rare, and very, very much a privilege, right? So people would be privileged to be sacrificed. That was a socially important thing. So let's go for the next slide. About Mayan beliefs, right? They're very complicated in the sense that they do at some point resemble some polytheistic religions in the old world, but not precisely. So the Mayan civilization had a very rich religious tradition with a pantheon of gods, each governing a specific aspect of nature, society, and daily life. Central to their beliefs were the concept of cyclical time and cosmic balance, meaning that the world has existed several times already, in each of those eras and with an apocalypse. Rituals including offerings and ceremonies were crucial for maintaining harmony between the gods and the human world. They also believed in an afterlife and the importance of ancestor worships. They had several havens, each haven designed for a certain type of person, and several hells with the same sort of deal. And those who didn't fit into havens would go onto a very hardcore trip in the world of the dead, which does resemble to some extent what the ancient Greeks thought, with the river Styx, and the ancient Egyptians with the same thing, and that sort of, resembles that. So you have to cross a very dangerous terrain to get to the afterlife, and then you would choose which wasn't specifically hell, right? But that was, no, it wasn't exactly haven as well. So you would choose your own afterlife. You would not choose. You would have to earn your own afterlife, basically. So you can either earn it during your lifetime. So let's say warriors go to a certain haven. People struck by lightning or drowning go to the haven of the rain god, right? Women that died during birth, giving birth, or while pregnant would go into another haven, etc., etc. So the ordinary people that didn't fit into any of those would have to go and pursue their own afterlife in some other levels of the that underground world, and that wouldn't be haven, obviously. So their religious practices were closely tied to their advanced knowledge of astronomy and calendar, and they had two calendars. One was religious with 280 days, and another one was the one that we have, 365. They considered jaguar-like god Itzama to be the creator, but also worshipped Kukulkan, which is the alternative to Quetzalcoatl, literally the same god, just different name, right? And many other deities, like Chak is the god of rain, etc., etc. So there's god of sun, god of rain, god of wind, a variety of different gods. Each is responsible for his own aspect. So this is Itzamna over here, and Chak, god of rain, on the right. So you can see, like, if you would be a Catholic, remember I said if you would be a pious Catholic, if you would look at this, you'd be like, oh my God, they are worshiping devils, literally. How horrible is that, right? So, yeah, that's they weren't exactly very fond of these Latin American pre-Columbian civilizations gods very much. But this is, talking about Aztec civilization. This is another civilization. There was a second civilization that they met. So with Mayas, it was literally easy for them because Mayas were already at decline, right? At some point, they left their own territory and they all concentrated in the Yucatan Peninsula, right? I'm going to show you that a little later when they were focusing. That's a nice map of where the Aztecs were and the Mayans were. It's a very small piece of territory, basically, relatively small, where most of the mines concentrated. Nobody knows why. Maybe they're driven off by the more aggressive northern tribes that later on become the Aztec Empire or part of that empire. Maybe that was epidemics. Maybe that was there was a religious reason. Nobody really knows. At this point, yeah, it doesn't really matter. They were in decline. So when the Spanish came around, Mayans didn't really fight all that much. They just gave up and said, whatever, nice, whatever. We're going to be with you guys. We're fine. And yeah, that led to a variety of misunderstandings, including religious one. There's this thing called auto de fe, which means in Spanish or in Latin, act of faith, right? So that means that, what stands for that is burning books, right? How that happened was that Mayans were happy to worship Jesus Christ, so they never really resisted all that much. And the Europeans were happy as well. Like, oh yeah, we're teaching them the real religion, but what Europeans didn't understand, in a polytheic religion, in a polytheic society, it's not a problem to worship one more God. Okay, what's the problem? One more God, one less God, who cares? Okay, Jesus, then Jesus. So they worshiped Jesus during the day, but at night they went into the jungle and worshiped their old deities. So when the Christians found it out, Diego de Landa, the most important and influential religious person during that time in the Americas, he said, okay, round up everything Mayan that you can see. So all the literature that Mayans had, all the idols, everything that had intricate carvings with letters on it, with text, everything was destroyed and burned. This is still something that Catholic Church says, we're sorry for that, and they still keep doing that because the world has lost a significant amount of Mayan culture, and Mayans exist today because, again, there wasn't a lot of wars. Mayans didn't really die. They were, conquered relatively easily. That is why they exist today. The problem is they don't really know what their heritage is or what their culture is. They're Spanish-speaking mostly. A lot of them don't know Mayan language or try to learn it properly, so it's a challenge, right? They try to recreate Mayan culture piece by piece, but there's not much left. That's the big problem and the great tragedy of what the Spanish and their Conquista has done in, with the Mayan people, with the Mayan civilization. Basically destroyed their heritage, destroyed their culture in the attempt to assimilate them. So this is the Aztecs. And originally, they weren't supposed to conquer Aztecs, right? They weren't supposed to go there. But there was this guy called, oh no, I don't have the image of him yet. Hernan Cortés, right? You have all heard about him. It's a great conquistador, very violent person, and he was an impoverished noble. So that means that he was of noble descent, but no money. So what does he do? He goes to Americas to earn cash, right? To earn some more cash, to return with a lot of money, return glory to his name. And he wasn't content with the little success that they've had in the Yucatan area. Remember, Spanish didn't really know what they were doing. They didn't know there was a huge continent over there. So he thought that he's going to take a little amount, like a small amount of people, go on to conquer that territory. That was done basically with no permission from the general governor, who was, the big guy, the most important person who was sanctioning all the operations. And neither the king or queen gave permission as well. So he was doing a rogue mission. And he was so successful that eventually that general governor, who's always said no to him, was removed. And Cortés basically is the reason why the great Aztec Empire is falling to its knees. So let's start with the very beginning. The Aztec Empire was thriving from 14th century to 16th century, so it was relatively new and young and very aggressive at the peak of their development, basically. It was a dominant force in central Mexico up until the Conquista. So while the Mayans were already in decline, these guys were very powerful, the most powerful force in the area. Known for their advanced agricultural practices, they developed irrigation systems and artificial islands called chinampas to avoid the problems related to desert lands under their control, because literally the territories that they occupied are mostly deserts, right? Or, you know, they're, again, you've seen the picture of the city. That city is located upon a lake, right? So it's a set of artificial islands. You know, hundreds of years before Dubai did it, the Aztecs have done it as well. And it wasn't just living areas that were floating on the lake. Also agricultural, these chinampas, right? These agricultural small artificial islands that have served to, you know, produce food. They had a rich culture of monumental architecture, including famous Templo Mayor at Tenochtitlan. Tenochtitlan is their capital. And Templo Mayor is considered to be one of the wonders of the world, really. If you played Civilization, guys, you know that's the one, right? It is literally a huge temple, the main temple. The architecture is very similar to Mayans because they're assumed to have one predecessor called Olmecs, right? And these Olmecs have given them the foundation of both of their cultures. But again, Mayans have probably also influenced them quite a lot. Their society was highly stratified, ruled by a king and nobles with a warrior class and a large population of commoners and slaves. So their society has been well structured. The warriors had a lot of responsibilities. They weren't just warriors, right? They also were farmers, and in that sense, they quite often needed to make sure that their farms are kept taken care of, right? That the land is being used. If you didn't use your land, you would lose your status. You would become a slave. You would be punished by the society. So yeah, once a hunter tribe, Aztecs managed to conquer other tribes around it, eventually growing into a very complex empire where original Aztecs played a central role. They were very aggressive, again, a hunter tribe mostly, but again, that kind of presupposes them to warlike activities. So these guys have been the most aggressive ones. They originally have been developing in alliance with other tribes, but they were the ones to rise to the top, and those ones were basically demoted to lower ranking subordinates, the other tribes. Religion has played, again, a central role in the existence of that empire. So as with Mayans, human sacrifices were quite common there. However, again, unlike Mayans, right? Because in Maya culture, those were rare. But for Aztecs, they were basically, you know, a norm, right? They've been very multiple. There are a lot of people being sacrificed, so they happen very frequently. And the reason for that is that they literally believed that their gods require human blood, human sacrifices. Otherwise, the sun will cease to exist. So they believe that, again, just like Mayas, they believe that the world has already existed several times, and each of those eras ended with apocalypse. The idea was for them that one of the gods becomes the sun, and his godly energy fuels the sun that allows the world to exist. But it is not unlimited. It's going to run out eventually, and the sun is going to just, cease to exist. In order for that not to happen, they would need to feed the sun with the most sacred substance that has ever existed, human blood. And this is basically, human blood for them is basically like a gasoline to a car. They fuel the sun, the world exists. They stop fueling the sun with blood, it will cease to exist, right? So this is how they delayed apocalypse. Okay. This is, what their religious beliefs were like, but they also had the god systems, right? Certainly also a polytheistic religion, and they believed also in the multitude of God, each overseeing different aspects of life in the natural world. You would see that they also very much align with what the Mayans believed in terms of gods. The sun god, Huitzilopochtli, was the center of the universe, whom they believed required the human sacrifices. Other important deities included Tlaloc, the rain god, which is the alternative of chalk. So the names are different, but the essence is pretty much the same. And Quetzalcoatl, the feather serpent, who was believed to be the civilizing god, the god that gave people the technology, who taught them how to build, how to make weapons, how to make tools, how to even the agricultural activities they believe have been given to them. The knowledge about agriculture has been given to them by Quetzalcoatl, and the maize, which is corn, right? That's how they call corn, was believed to be given to the people, gifted to the people by Quetzalcoatl. So, and that became, the foundation of the entirety of their diet, and everything was made out of corn. And of course, there was a multitude of rituals and festivals deeply embedded in the daily life and governance. The Aztecs believed in a cosmic balance, once again necessitating offers and sacrifices to ensure the continuation of the world as it was. The temples and pyramids were significant religious sites where priests conducted those sacred rituals. This belief system profoundly influenced their culture, politics, and societal structure. Let me go into the next slide. So here we go. The images here are also, this god of air right here on the left, god of rain on the right. All of them look very much like horrible demons or monsters, right? You wouldn't really want to worship any one of those guys. And to be fair, with their cosmology, all the gods were very vengeful, very violent. So yeah, they're not very nice, right? So you need to be on good terms with them, otherwise they will smash and obliterate you. So yes, here we go. That's the map that I promised you guys. So the Aztec Empire is the yellow one, right? You can see where it is right now in the Central America. This is the Gulf of Mexico to help you understand the what that is. This is Lake Texcoco, right? This is where they originally started. This is where Tenochtitlan is, and the biggest cities are also located here. Yeah, the most important Aztec sites, as you can see, are all around the Lake Tenochtitlan. It's a huge lake, and they decided to settle there because of the religious legend that they've been telling themselves, that one of the gods have told them they've been a nomadic tribe that everybody just kicked out of the territory. Nobody allowed them to settle anywhere, so they've been roaming the desert, just like the Jews. And at some point, an eagle sat on a cactus, eating a snake. All right, he had a snake in his beak, and that was believed to be the sign we are going to settle here. Right, so that's what literally, very similar to the Jewish idea of roaming the desert for 40 years waiting for a sign. And then the Mayans, right? They slowly but steadily just moved over here. This is Yucatan, right? This green area, this peninsula is Yucatan, and so basically, that territory was originally what the Spanish were conquering, right? And our guy Cortez has decided to go from here to here, and he did it rogue with taking only several hundred people, and it helped them a lot in the sense that originally they weren't fighting. When he came, they believed him to be a god, right? They believed him to be the white-feathered serpent. The emperor of Aztecs himself have given him gifts, people, money, and he was able to communicate with all of them, learn about their culture thanks to his lover, right? I mean Cortez, because he found himself a lover out of one of the tribes that Aztecs have been constantly attacking, right, to get riches, to get slaves. So they hated Aztecs very, very much. And inside the empire, other tribes that were already in the empire also hated Aztecs because of their privileged position. So he learned that quite well thanks to that woman. So yeah, behind every great man there is a great woman. That's very true in this situation. And she taught him the language, taught him everything, told them everything to know about them. So Inca civilization is the third civilization and has been conquered the last because it's in South America. And because it's far away from both Aztecs and Mayans, who had one predecessor, Olmecs, Incas are very different, right? They're very different. They don't have as much similarities. And unlike the two that are either in the tropical forest or in the desert, right? These guys are were mostly located in the mountains. As you can see right here, this is an actual Inca site, right? It used to be an Inca city. and it's up in the mountains. Let's go. So the Inca Empire is literally here. This is the Andean Mountains, guys. So literally 90% of their territory lies in the montanian areas, which has made the conquest quite a challenge. It doesn't mean that before that nobody lived there, just that at some point at 1463, when not that long after the Columbus would arrive, in 30 years, 29 to be specific, would discover America. The Incan Empire didn't exist for a long time, so it was a very young empire. And yeah, unfortunately, it found its demise when the conquistadors came around. So let's go a little further. The Inca Empire existed again from it was the largest empire of the pre-Columbian America because its stretch was so long. It's literally the biggest one so far. Renowned for their engineering feats, they built extensive road and irrigation systems very high up the mountains and remarkable structures like Machu Picchu up in the mountains, very far away, with no horses, no bulls, nothing like that. Again, pure technology and the strength of human brain allowed them to do that. The Incas had a centralized government headed by Sapa Inca, who also was believed to be sent by God to rule Incas. With a complex administrative structure, which sometimes led to internal conflicts. So Sapa Inca is literally like an avatar of God on the face of the earth. And they believed in the sun god, right? It's not very original, just like the Egyptians. Okay, for them, the sun god was also the most important one in their, structure of deities, just ancient Slavs with Yarila, right? The same sort of thing. Like the sun is the most powerful thing they could imagine. So yeah, that's the Sapa Incas and the envoy of the sun god. The economy was based on agriculture, quite obviously, and weaving, and they were the ones to figure out how to properly farm in the mountains, which is not an easy thing, really. But they discovered how to make it through the system of terraces and very complex irrigation systems as well. The Inca religion involved worship of the sun god Inti and the other deities with significant rituals and ceremonies, some of which were similar to northern civilizations, but with way more unique traits. They used sacrifices, that's true. And those sacrifices were often mummified and believed to magically protect the family. And it was also, just like with the Mayans, it was also a privilege. They would normally take a family member who would then be sacrificed, but they wouldn't sacrifice it the way the Aztecs and the Mayans did on top of the pyramids, with the heart being taken out, with the person being stabbed with obsidian blade. No. They didn't like blood. The blood didn't really have a lot of significance for them. No bloodletting, no taking out internal organs in front of everyone. Wasn't that spectacular. What they did, they would either block somebody in a cave, or they would take somebody up in the mountains. They would drug them or give them alcohol. And after they were drugged out of conscience, they would just leave them there. So they would eventually have no way down, or no way to escape, and they would just die from starvation and lack of water. And they would then go back, take those bodies, mummify them, and that would be believed to protect your clan, your family, right? You'd be a heirloom of your family with magical powers. So yeah, interesting approach to human sacrifice. Instead of ordinary ordinary writing system. They didn't have letters as we know them. They didn't have writing as we know them because, again, no paper. They figured out the way because they were very developed in weaving. So they used Quechua, a system of knots on rope, signifying both letters and numbers. So you literally have a piece of rope with a bunch of different knots on it, and by whatever that is, you would go, you'd try them, and like, okay, this is a bill for my apartment or something like that, right? So, it's very interesting. There's some knowledge of how some of the Quechua words might have been in the system of knots have been done, how you could try to do that, but largely it is lost, right, to us, simply because a rope, unfortunately, is not that easy to preserve as paper, right? But yeah, it's not. It wasn't a great idea in terms of preservation of knowledge, but it's unique. Inca religious beliefs were to some extent a little different. In Inca mythology, Inti was the primary deity, revered as the sun god and considered as an ancestor of the Inca rulers. Inti held a central place in Inca religion and was integral to their understanding of the cosmos. At the source of warmth and light, Inti was a vital source, a vital provider for agriculture, which was the foundation of the entirety of Inca society. The worship of Inti involved various rituals and offerings, and his influence was reflected in the Inca architecture with temples dedicated to Inti worship. Unlike Mayans and Aztecs, Incas only offered human sacrifices, as already mentioned, in very rare occasions, and preferred to sacrifice children. Forget to mention that, children, who they drugged and sent up to the mountains, rolled them up, and then, you get a dead child who you mummify, and that's somehow going to protect you. This is the depiction of Inti, god of Incas, and he doesn't look anything like the gods that we've seen before to some extent, right? So it's a little unique compared to that. So I mentioned the first encounter happened with Columbus. Everybody who thinks Columbus was a great historic figure should reconsider. That was a myth created intentionally because Americans really at some point needed local heroes, right? The local historic figures they could have cherished. However, Columbus was really a weirdo. He was aimed to discover a route to Asia to bypass Ottoman Empire. He based his ideas of how to reach that on a faulty knowledge about Earth. While people already knew the Earth was round, he thought the Earth was egg-shaped. So he managed to persuade the Spanish crown that he's going to reach India faster if he goes west, not east, right? He thought that, because of how the Earth is shaped, he would go in a different direction. It would lead him there faster than, the other route. So he was wrong. That's clear. The Spanish king and queen weren't idiots. He had already moved throughout the entirety of Europe trying to get money for his expedition. Nobody gave him money, but these guys did because they were severely indebted. And they're like, this is not a big sum of money for us. If we lose it, we'll lose it. We're just going to owe a little more money to other people. But if we are successful somehow, this is going to change everything for us. We'll be able to pay off all our debts and we'll be rich forever. So, long story short, that actually worked out for the Spanish crown quite well. Columbus really did reach the Western Hemisphere, but he never set foot in actual America, the actual continent. He only reached an island of St. Helena. He thought that was India, and originally he met the Taino people, the locals, and he thought they were Indians. They were very friendly. They wore no clothes. They were polytheic in terms of religion, and basically at the level of tribal development. They weren't exactly civilization. Islanded people. This had made him believe that these people were, however, barbaric, despite the fact that they fed the Spaniards, gave them water, everything they needed. They treated them. What he really wanted would be porcelain, spices, and gold, none of which these people obviously had. And he believed that they were just hiding it from them. He believed them to be Indians, remember, they're hiding it. So he ordered his people to kill everybody. And that's what they did. They wiped the Taino people out. Then they figure out, that this is an island. This is probably not India. Although, even though they figured it out at some point, they weren't exactly fast telling that to the crown. They were still trying to fool the crown. They actually reached India, so he managed to go back and forth a couple of times before he got arrested, and his shenanigans were uncovered by the crown. So he was arrested, he was sent to jail, and he died in jail, impoverished and forgotten by everybody, really. So that was his fate, simply for manipulating the crown and the information that he had at the time. So again, weird guy, responsible for a genocide, nothing really to worship him for. So, however, the St. Helena Island really did turn into a pivotal base for the Spaniards and the Western Hemisphere, from which they expanded elsewhere. So again, Columbus did not end well. I already said that. Despite that, he has provided Europeans with a mindset about Americans, right? Because he has written on so many occasions that the locals are, underdeveloped, barbaric, tribal, unworthy of civilizing. He was like, just, put them to work, enslave them, conquer them. And this is the famous formula of Conquista, right? Conquer, put them to work, civilize when you can, baptize, That's it. Absolutely unconsiderate of any developments, of any knowledge, of any qualities that these people would actually have. Spanish needed the Conquista for several reasons. Too many mercenaries and fighters left from Reconquista, which happened before, and that's reconquering their own land from the Arabs that have taken the land and have lived there for 800 years in the Iberic Peninsula. So they've been slowly reconquering this land, and due to the fact that the war is a costly endeavor, they were knee deep in debt. Right? They owed a lot of money, and to maintain the status of a superpower number one in Europe, Spain needed some more money. And they've come out of the Reconquista as one of the most battle-worthy states in the entirety of Europe. So yeah, they needed to maintain that reputation. The spread of Christianity also was very important. It made Spain one of the most important allies of papacy, just like Portugal, which was a lot smaller, but still. There we go. How did the conquest of America happen? Again, the conquest of Latin America happened in three main stages. The first were the Mayans. The most formidable figure here is Diego de Landa, a priest who burned all the Mayan books and scrolls and destroyed the heritage of the whole civilization. This is why his name is, not he's not remembered for the best things. Exactly. Mayans were already a deteriorating civilization, so they didn't put up much of a fight. They were easily taken over and the first ones to experience forceful baptism into Catholic denomination. They were also the first one to experience forced labor, but Spanish very soon figured out that it doesn't work. The locals did not endure the forced labor very well. They just died. A lot of them would just lay down and die, stop eating, stop drinking, would just die. That's how intense that workload was, and that has motivated them to ship, later on when everything was already conquered, to ship African slaves because they were a lot more durable. They survived in these quite harsh environments very easily, and they were a lot more sturdier. So yeah, African slaves became a must for agriculture in the Americas and plantations. Because the fight against Mayans weren't intensive, they have a lot of descendants living today in Mexico. This is Auto de Fe. This is the picture depicting him burning everything, all the idols, all the literature, everything he could possibly burn. Yeah, not the great moment, not the brightest moment for Catholic Church. Second, the fight against Aztecs. It only took them 3 years. Think about this. We're talking about the most formidable, militarily, most formidable civilization of Central America, which was had a lot more people, a lot more numerous than Spain back in the day, and obviously a lot more people than the conquistadors. It was carried out by Hernan Cortés. He took 200 men originally, 200 men just, and a dozen horses, and he sailed with one ship onto the enemy territory and managed to perform very well. He established alliances, and with the traditional divide and conquer, he managed to take down an entire civilization. He very well understood how the rivalries work over there. So he played those rivalries very well to his own, benefit. And he got control of the Aztec Emperor Moctezuma, simply because diplomacy there was different, warfare was different. They never realized how brutal and backstabby the Spanish were, right? It was a totally different warfare these two civilizations were fighting. Well, the Aztecs would normally, when the armies would meet, they would then regroup into smaller groups, into smaller fighting groups, and just go into duels, one-on-one. Whoever wins gets a trophy, gets a hostage, right? And then those hostages are either slaves or they are given into sacrifice. That's it. With European warfare, the Europeans quite often also fought, one against another, would capture nobles, but only nobles. Would capture nobles because you could sell nobles for a good price. There could be literally, in one fight, in one battle, you could have captured a noble, and that would be your jackpot. You would be forever loaded with money because his people would pay ransom. And then he would live with you for a while because, you'd be waiting for that ransom, you would receive it, you would let him go. Or sometimes they would let go that noble because he's given a word. of a noble that he will pay the ransom, he would go away home, would then send the money, and everything would be fine. But these people weren't exactly Christians, they weren't exactly nobles, nobody to get the money from. So the Spanish just resorted to the war, the eliminatory war. They would eliminate their enemies, obliterate them, kill them, neutralize them, right? They would slaughter their enemies rather than take them hostage. And that was, Aztecs didn't really understand that. They didn't really understand why. And the brutality was weird to them. And also, if you would capture somebody like an emperor, or you would win in the war, you wouldn't exactly go forward and destroy your enemy, right? Normally, the Aztecs would just negotiate what these people would tribute to them, right? It would be rounds and rounds of diplomatic negotiations after that. Okay, you won, so what do you want? And you would list what you want, you would negotiate, and then the winner would receive the spoils of war. But yeah, the Spanish were there to conquer, to destroy that state, something that Aztecs didn't really understand was happening. This is how Moctezuma was being captured. He was captured because he went to negotiate with Cortés without any guards. And Cortés was like, okay, so you're my prisoner now. You're stupid, and you're my prisoner now. But this is something that also gave him an upper hand fighting with the Aztec armies, because they really didn't know what to do when the head of the state is literally captured by the enemy. They were basically paralyzed. Yeah, that helped them a lot to win, to win in this uneven fight. He was still killed, right? The Moctezuma was still killed, even though he was baptized, but he was still not the correct version of a Christian for the Cortés people. So he was killed in his sleep. So Cortés was especially successful because locals have never seen his equipment: gunpowder, horses, steel armor, etc. None of that actually existed there. They never had horses, right? So whenever they've seen cavalry, they would think that a horse rider, is a centaurous figure, like a monster, like they were the one entity, right? They would be scared shitless, of course. Gunpowder, boom, right? And nothing like that. So they believed it to be magic, believed it to be thunder. And moreover, again, they were mistaken for white-bearded god Quetzalcoatl. So they've been gifting them with a bunch of stuff, giving them resources, and supporting them in a lot of ways before the fight even started. So when the crown realized Cortés was already so successful fighting locals by the hands of other locals, they've sent reinforcements. So by the end of the 1521, the great empire of Aztecs was basically defeated, but Cortés was then replaced by another person to rule the territory, and the crown was afraid of his popularity because he was really very successful, too successful. They were like, okay, he's going to proclaim himself king, and we'll have a great, very powerful kingdom over there, and Cortés will take all the spoils of that conquest. They couldn't do that. This is how Cortés looked. And this is him negotiating with Moctezuma. As you can see, there's a Spanish soldier creeping up from behind. Yeah, because they're going to take him hostage in a second. Inca Empire was conquered by another person. It was Francisco Pizarro. He wasn't a noble. He was a poor man from Spain with no noble origin. And as you can see, it took him quite a while. It took them almost 40 years, right, to conquer it. However, the actual war was won just within a year. The actual war, the empire was defeated by 1533. How, you say? What happened in the other 39 years, right? It is because the conquest was, retaking the leftover territories was very hard. It was sort of a federation. So when they defeated the center, the rest of the empire was just, okay, we're going to exist the way we are. We're going to continue existing the way we are. And that's it, right? It's like if something happened, then Andijan would be like, or, Tver would be like, okay, we're now a separate kingdom or something like that. So they would have to reconquer everything. And because of the hard terrain, because of the mountains, the Spanish were doing it very slowly. Incas almost mistook the Spanish for allies, as well as the Mayans and the Aztecs, almost. But at very last point, the envoy came and said, no, they're not allies, they're enemies, they're here to conquer us, prepare for battle. And they did. They gave them a hell of a battle. Unfortunately for Incas, again, the way they were fighting their battles was a little different. For instance, the emperor himself, the Sapa Inca, was there on the battlefield. And conveniently, he was wearing a very specific, very clear to see attire, so everybody would know that their emperor is with them. Unfortunately, the Spanish also knew immediately that this is the main guy, so they rushed to him and killed him. It was the end of the battle. Even though they had more people, more of everything, that was it, right? And unfortunately, just before that, several years ago, they had a civil war where an unpopular candidate won. It was a war between two brothers, an unpopular candidate won. So everybody was already hating him very much. So nobody really pursued to continue fighting as a whole empire. No, everybody just was very satisfied with the idea to have their own independence and their own little kingdom, and they just never cooperated with one another. So Spain literally divided and conquered one by one. Uh, Some of these territories were, however, never conquered in the deep south, in the very south, were never conquered. They stopped at some point and said, this is enough, right? And these people living there were nomadic tribes called Araucanos, right? The Araucan tribes were fighting from time to time with the Spanish, never really defeating them, and Spanish have set up defense systems against them. It is ironical that only after the colonial empire has fallen, the Spanish colonial empire has fallen, the new independent and civilized and enlightened independent governments of Latin America have actually retaken the land and slaughtered everybody, and there was a hell of a genocide, but done by people with increasingly liberal ideology. Yes. And their constant fight, obviously, with them led to the disappearance of those local ethnicities. So people living in those southern areas would be white, not native, white, right? Or not mixed race. They would be white Europeans living there. Like Argentina, for instance. It's almost 100% white European people living there. You wouldn't tell them apart from average Spanish person. Francisco Pizarro, it's him right here. And this is what they've been doing to Sapa Inca right there. He was, again, silly enough to be in the battlefield and disclose his location, so the Spanish specifically rushed to kill him. This is a picture of the Spaniards, of the conquistadors, killing the emperor. How did the Native Americans react? Well, they tried to rebel, and all the rebellions were suppressed with brute force. Higher firepower, more resources, and advanced war technologies alongside with pandemics of various European diseases have made forceful resistance futile. One of the aspects of how multi-million country gets defeated by a handful of conquistadors is also diseases. And there was no knowledge of how to cure them. There was no understanding how to protect yourself from them. So it's a pandemic of its own time, and millions of people died specifically because the Europeans have brought illnesses that locals had no resistance, no immune system to deal with, right? Accommodation is another strategy. A lot of the people also decided to accept the Spanish rule. After the first initial years of brutality, the Spanish crown has issued a series of laws and decrees protecting the locals while also limiting their freedoms. Again, ironically, when the colonial empire fell, those horrible discriminatory laws have been abolished as well, introducing the brutality of the liberals, of the early liberals of those early independent Latin American states, who have taken away all the privileges and never gave them anything in return, and only brutally disprivileged these people, taking away their land and any degree of protection that existed, basically impoverishing them into marginal elements of society. So you either would be a pauper, which is basically a landless poor farmer, laborer, right? Laborer for hire, who would be a farmer for hire, or even worse, like beggars, etc. So the local beliefs in many places have merged with Christianity. Almost the entirety of Latin America is Catholic, right? But they've merged with local cults, creating unique set of cultural features existing up until this date, like Day of the Dead. If you've seen what was it, the Coco Mystery than Coco, right? Coco Mystery. It is a Disney cartoon specifically about the Day of the Dead. If you would look at how they're dressed, the face paint they would give themselves is and the very idea that there's a saint death, right, is incredibly non-Christian, but it's incredibly local at the same time. So it's a great, interesting mixture of the local beliefs with Christianity. So yeah, it's, the conclusion is pretty simple. It was mostly marked by brutality. The people from the European side weren't exactly there to cooperate, trade, or look into any opportunities to cooperate properly, right? They were there to conquer because after 800 years of Conquista, the the brutality of the mercenaries and their very narrow, big-headed mindset that everybody who's not like us should be killed or pushed out of the territory and we take whatever we want. This sort of mentality has predetermined the horrible nature of the collision of the European culture and the Native American cultures, and has created foundation for further phenomena that we know as colonialism, because it was very hard to set up camp across an ocean. And how do you govern that? What do you do? And the approach to managing that territory as colonies, we owe it to the Spanish because they've created that idea of extractionism, where you suck out all the resources from your faraway land and bring it to the continent, right? Bring it to that little piece of territory that you owe on the continent because it's OG, it's the correct Spain, right? And the people who are even of Spanish origin, 100%. Spanish blood, but born there were called Creoles. They were still inferior in the social structure of the mainland Spanish are here. Creoles, the Spanish of the colonies, were here. That already created significant tensions, which would then be the seeds of its own demise of the Spanish colonial system. Colonial, without a doubt, has destroyed the unique pre-Columbian civilizations, and colonial management of the territories have left nowadays Latin American countries in the periphery of world economy and severely underdeveloped because all they did was take, take, take. No industries were developed because Spain was very scared that these people will become more powerful because there were more people, more resources, more of everything. But they were like, no, you're not allowed to use it. You're not allowed to develop. Everything should go to Madrid, right? And that's basically it. And these are the questions that we are going to discuss with you guys when we meet next, right? What were the Native Americans' perceptions of the Spaniards who came, and vice versa? So we can talk about that as well. What motivated Columbus and the Kingdom of Castile to make this voyage to Americas? What did Columbus expect to find? What were the key elements of, in the next question, what were the key elements of Cortés' conquest of the Aztecs? Then the same about the Incas. Very simple questions. All of them are covered here, which you can also cover in the reading that is available in the book. Don't forget to watch the videos in the PowerPoint. This PowerPoint is available in the file section in Canvas. There's 3 videos that you need to watch. Those will be very important, and information there might appear in the midterm. So yeah, don't miss that. With that said, thank you very much. Love you guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Again, we'll meet when we meet, and we will discuss this further on when we meet online, face-to-face, sort of, screen to screen, okay? Then the next lecture will be focusing on something else. Okay, see ya.